El Nino development is stalling. What's going on? I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Storm Surf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, June 18th.
Storm surf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Be sure and like and subscribe. Ring the bell. You get automatic notifications when the videos are posted, typically on Sunday evenings. Also, if you'd like to donate, you can use the special thanks button down below, the heart with a $sign in it. And I'd like to thank last week's contributors. Peter Belden, Sportman Jason, thank you so much. Captain Skeezer, Elliot Harris, Devlin Millay, Aaron Korn, Ricardo Durate. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your contributions. It helps the site keep going. And with that, let's get to work. We'll start by looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean. And yes, lo and behold, there is a gale in the central South Pacific, producing 27-foot seas aimed off to the north. They're actually a little bit bigger. I think it was last night or early part this morning, nearly 30 feet. And this is generating some swell, and it's actually going to target Hawaii. Lo and behold, first time all summer. And energy, of course, also radiating towards California. We'll get into the details in just a second. But let's do a quick check at current conditions. We're going to start in Northern California, up just north of San Francisco. Point Reyes buoy number 029. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting that buoy, anywhere from 33.3 second period, super long period energy, which there isn't any, all the way down to 5 second period. It's not even wind swell, it's chop. You see there's a good amount of energy there. We see a bump here in about the 20-second period, maybe small, tiny swell starting to arrive. And then we see another bump here in about the 14 to 15 second period range. That's swell that has been hitting over the weekend. And then you see a whole bunch of wind swell in the mix. Put it all together, primary swell, 5 feet at 6.1 seconds. That's the dominant swell from 333 degrees. That's 3-foot surf. I mean, it's just a pure white cap mess in Northern California right now. Then we have that secondary swell, 1.8 feet at 13.7 seconds. It's not from 220 degrees. It's like, I don't know, something pretty south angle, but that's 2.5-foot surf. And then the 20-second period is much smaller, probably half a foot, and it doesn't even register on the chart. Going down to Santa Cruz, the Santa Cruz buoy number 254. This is protected from all the wind swell. There again, you see that 21-second period bump. The other bit of energy here in about the 14-second period range. And, of course, none of the wind swell. Put that all together. Primary swell, 1.2 feet at 14.6 seconds from 199 degrees. That's about 2 foot, 1.8 feet. And, yeah, there are waist-high sets down there today. And then secondary energy, now it shows here, 0.6 of a foot from 18.6 seconds from 198 degrees. That's surf at 1.2 feet. What would that be? Knee to thigh high. Going down to Southern California, buoy 191, the Point Loma South buoy there off of San Diego. We see the same sort of a profile, a little bit of energy dribbling at about 20 seconds. That other swell in the 14-second period range. None of the wind swell, all blocked from the Channel Islands. And you do the math here. Primary swell, 1.7 feet at 13.8 seconds from 189 degrees. That's 2.5-foot surf. There was, shoulder-high surf at select top spots today. And then that secondary swell, 0.7 of a foot from 18.4 seconds from 190 degrees, and not really even rideable. Then looking at the south shore of, this is Maui, but good for the south shore of Oahu as well, buoy 239. We see just little bits of energy scattered anywhere from 16 seconds down to 7 seconds. Primary swell, 1.4 feet at 13.2 seconds from 219 degrees. That would suggest it's coming up through the Tasman Sea. That'd put surf at about 2 foot, and that's about what it is, and then some wind swell mixed in there as well. Now, the Waimea Bay buoy is down, but on Kauai, the Honolulu buoy, number 202. Why are we looking at this? Because there is swell small as it is, but in the 13, 14 second period range. This is from a tropical system that blew up over the dateline a couple of days ago. Primary swell 2.7 feet at 13.7 seconds from 305 degrees. That's surf at 3.7 foot Hawaiian, I don't know, shoulder to head high, something like that. Then wind swell in the mix as well. And this swell should continue for a little bit, but we'll get into that in a sec. So here's the animation from early Wednesday, June 14th. Tropical system developed south of Japan, off of Taiwan, pretty strong at one point, faded, and then started redeveloping just briefly on Friday, the 16th, so just a day or two ago. Got, well, actually here, right there, that was the peak of it, 23-foot seas. These are the highest seas down here over this entire domain, with winds at about 44 knots, aimed more south than southeast. But then quickly after that on Friday, we got some 21 and 20-foot seas aimed at the Hawaiian Islands. You can see the swell front right here. As we get into, well, we're about out of it, but you can see the leading edge of it there. The longer period, less frequent intervals are already starting to hit Kauai, and that should continue for a day or so, and some energy seeping into the north shore of Oahu. And then also down south on Sunday, the 11th of June last week, a gale started developing in the far southeast Pacific. Nothing particularly solid. Tiny little area. What was that? It says 30.8 foot seas, 1 pixel there, but we'll say 28 foot seas. And even that's a bit of a, there's 26 to 28 foot seas there on Monday, the 12th, and continuing into about Monday night, early Tuesday, and then pushing out of even the Southern California swell window. That is the gale that has produced that 20-second period energy or 18-second period energy that is just starting to show in California now, and that should build into the middle of the week. All right, so what's coming for the next week? Well, we're going to start by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales, and when those gales form, help direct their track. We're in the South Pacific, right? New Zealand there, Australia there, Antarctica here, the Ross Ice Shelf, somewhere around 65 south. I've made a couple of posts on Instagram suggesting, well, that pretty much clearly indicate that the extent of the sea ice coverage is less this year than any other year so far to date, and continuing on that trend of being less. Yes, it's still growing, but it doesn't have as much total area over the ocean as it has in past years. There's a bit of concern around the ocean temperatures, not just in the Pacific, but in the Atlantic as well. I mean, just sea surface temperatures are way above normal. That's impacting ice. That's affecting global temperatures. The general thought is there was the volcano, the undersea volcano, was it maybe 2 years ago that blew up? It just spewed piles of water vapor into the atmosphere. That's really good at helping to trap heat in. There was also some other things going on then, of course, the CO2 issue and, just the general trend toward a warming planet. But it's been, the development of El Nino, of course. So all these things have combined and sort of raised temperatures. The question is it just a one-year event or is it going to linger for a while? We don't know, but that is something just to note. All right, so we're looking at jet stream level winds. These winds, so here is the northern branch of the jet. It is strongest with winds at about 140 knots, pushing the whole way across the Pacific, basically creating an atmospheric river slamming into Chile. We haven't seen something like this in quite a while, but this is not the important branch of the jet. It's this one down here. And it has, at least it's got more energy than it did maybe 5 days ago when there was literally nothing now. There's a bit of a ridge pushing south here. Anyway, what the jet does when it starts lifting north like this, we're looking for a trough. When you get a trough like that, that creates a clockwise flow aloft in the atmosphere. That's the hallmark of low pressure. It also does the same thing down at the surface. Of course, low pressure, if it's strong enough, generates winds. With winds, if they're strong enough, get purchase on the ocean's surface, start generating seas. Seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, eventually turn into swell, and swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. So we're very interested in troughs, and we have a little bit of one trying to organize here, but winds are pretty weak. You really want winds about 140 knots. It continues into Monday and then Tuesday, and that is what is responsible for that bit of sea seas we saw in the deep or in the upper reaches of the central South Pacific. That thing fades out as we get into Tuesday night, the 20th of June. And then at least we get a building jet pattern now across the South Pacific. And theoretically, a bit of another weak trough starts building on Friday, the 23rd of June, lifting northeast. Perhaps that'll get some traction and produce yet another gale, more like over the southeast Pacific, typical of what this entire summer has been like during La Nina years. The center of storm focus is in the southeast Pacific during El Nino years. It's in the southwest Pacific you go, but NOAA declared we're in El Nino. Yes, sort of, but we're at the very early stages of it. I mean, it needs 6 months to a year before it's really going to have, maybe 3 months in, we'll say, somewhere down here in the South Pacific, we'll start seeing some activity, and we're thinking maybe late July at the earliest. And then here we are, a week out, maybe another trough starts building behind that. So all hope is not lost. We're just in a pause in the southern hemi swell machine for the moment. Next up, surface level pressure, surface level winds. So we have our trough right here. There's our typical low pressure, not particularly strong, 35, maybe 40 knot winds. From the south, getting some traction, generating some swell, as we saw in the significant wave height chart just a little bit ago. A secondary pulse of this is to start developing this evening with 40, almost 45 knot winds. Right out of the south and building even a little bit into tomorrow morning. This is actually an upgrade from this morning's runs of the model, so that's a good sign. And again, that sort of sweeping motion does really well for Hawaii. Hawaii is about 158 west off the top end of the chart here. See the fetch aimed right at it, but also good swell seems likely for California as a result. That starts slowly fading out as we get into later Tuesday and Wednesday, and it's all but gone. Then we get the new system forecast on Friday. Ice line right around 64, something like that, with 45 knot southwest winds, maybe getting some traction. Again, this is an upgrade from this morning's run of the model, so we'll see how that fares on the significant wave height charts, with some secondary fetch building in behind that on Saturday into Sunday. And this, too, is a significant upgrade. Again, it's a week out, don't believe it, but it looks like there is some hope, and then moving out of the Southern California swell window with maybe some more activity behind that. So what's the effect of those winds on the ocean surface? We're going to go back to just a day ago, Saturday, when that gale first started building. We see fetch here. So by Saturday evening, we had 27-foot seas, and then they pushed just barely to 30, it says 31.5 feet, but we'll say 30 feet on late last evening, and then up to 31 feet again this morning, and then fading at the moment. But then looking forward, we see the gale fade out Sunday night, but then on Monday, here we go. The second pulse of it starts with 29, almost 30-foot seas, about 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. on Monday, building to 30 feet, and then holding in that range all the way through Monday evening, even into Tuesday morning at 28 feet, fading to 27 feet, then pretty much fading out from there. And then some energy taking aim on Chile with 25-foot seas, maybe 26 feet, and then fading out. And after that, things quiet down. Now let's keep going. We know there's another gale right off the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf. Here we go. The peak of it up here, it looks like at about 64 to the south. 28-foot seas, basically sweeping due east. Don't know how much that's going to do for swell production, except for maybe Chile up into Peru. Then we get into late Saturday, the 24th of July, secondary fetch, again with 30-foot seas. This almost looks like a mirror image of the system that's generating swell that's just starting to arrive in California now. And then, but oops, that's then building out from there. And we'll see. It's a week out. Local wind forecast for California here, Hawaii here. High pressure in control, 1032 millibars, centered right over the middle of the Gulf of Alaska, generating fetch at 20 knots along the North California coast, 15 knots, and a lot more or less lighter trades for the Hawaiian Islands. So we get into Monday, northwest winds start building for California. Here we go again, 15, 20 knots, generating just junky wind swell and pretty much a mess. Light trades for the Hawaiian Islands. Get into Tuesday, more of the same, 20, almost 25 knots. Now notice the center of this fetch is over central California. That's probably not great for producing wind swell. It's just pure raw 5-6 period second junk for the most part. Low pressure trying to move into Washington here kind of late in the year. Trades for the Hawaiian Islands. So we get into Wednesday, more of the same thing. Trades building a little bit, 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. Thursday, the wind machine starts backing off. We'll say 10 to 15 knots for North and Central California, whereas, see the high pressure here, it starts pulling away or reforming further out, focusing on Hawaii trades at 15 plus knots. So we get into Friday, a more or less lighter wind regime for California. Trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. Saturday, light winds, weak low pressure off of California. That's good for California. Trades making for trade wind generated wind swell for the Hawaiian Islands, 15, maybe 20 knots. Then we get into Sunday, more of the same, light wind regime, trades 20 knots solid for the Hawaiian Islands. And then we are a week out and still the same, light winds for California, strong trades for the Hawaiian Islands. Snow forecast dashboard for the Pacific Crest Trail where it intersects with Tioga Pass Road. No snow forecast, though. I've seen some reports of flurries up in Oregon in that area. But it's the snow level that we're interested. The temperatures have been, the freeze level. So how do you read this chart? The reds is liquid above freezing temperatures. The gray is sleet, like anywhere from 32 to 36 degrees. The white is where 32 degrees starts, and then the blue is 28 degrees or less. So at elevation, we see the freeze level today, 12,000 feet, falling down to about maybe 8,500 feet theoretically as we get into, that would be like Monday night, early Tuesday. And then temperatures trying to build back up, then cooling off just a little bit on the late on the 22nd of June, and then a steady rise back up into the 12,500 foot range. The point being on this, we don't see any big spikes up at 14,000 feet, which typically you see at summer, and that would facilitate a quick snow melt and maybe some flooding, but we're in this regime where it's just generally cooler at elevation. That facilitates a slower, more steady snow melt, a controlled snow melt, so that water managers can try to collect as much of that water, manage it through the reservoir system, and keep California with water to drink for the next couple of years. So, surf spot forecast. We'll do Half Moon Bay for Northern California. This is mainly the wind swell forecast. Surf heights in the 2 to 3 foot range, going down to 1.5 foot. Let's do some inspection here. Swell height, 1.7 feet, 1.5 feet at about 13 to 14 seconds. So that fading swell that's been hanging around a little bit. New swell starts arriving later Tuesday, 17.5 second period. And then you can't see it here, the wind swell just sort of takes over and kind of buries it. So we'll go look at Santa Cruz. But then you can see the next swell arriving as we get Tuesday into Wednesday, 15-second period, sort of dropping off. It's a battle between the wind swell, which isn't very big, and the southern hemi swell, which isn't really big. The model has a hard time which one is dominant, so it starts toggling all back and forth. But you get the general idea. Surf heights in Santa Cruz, 3 foot, fading to 2 feet, and down from there. Then we go down to Dana Point, probably a good proxy for the southern hemi swell. We see bits of surf on Tuesday and Wednesday in about the 2.5 foot range, fading out from there. Swell sizes, again, that sort of contest between the wind swell and the ground swell. But 16-second, 15-second, that's on Tuesday, Wednesday, with pure swell about 1.7 feet, something like that, and slowly fading out as we get later in the week. And yes, in late June, we're talking about the north shore of Oahu. Not much, but a little bit. That swell from that tropical system, 3.5 feet on Monday morning, fading from 3 feet and down from there. Swell sizes, 3 feet at 12 to about 12, maybe almost 13 seconds earlier, then fading down by Tuesday, or at least Tuesday midday. Most all this is gone, and then it's back to flatness. And then looking for any southern hemi swell, we're using Maui just because the south shore of Maui protects us from the wind swell. See nothing really, 1.5 foot, maybe 2 feet. Swell size is 1.5 feet at 12 seconds, 1.1 feet at 11 seconds, and then it's pretty much all wind swell after that. So a little bit of background energy Monday and Tuesday, and then it's over. So what's going on long term? What's going on specifically with the Madden-Julian oscillation and the El Nino Southern oscillation? These two oscillations are responsible for the majority of driving the weather systems over the Pacific, both in winter and summer months, though the MJO has its strongest influence mainly in the fall and early winter over the North Pacific. We're starting by looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO, the Madden-Julian oscillation. There's two phases, active and inactive. The active phase is like a low-pressure system, the inactive phase like a high-pressure system. They rotate around the planet from west to east on the equator. The inactive phase on one side of the planet, the active phase on the other. It is the active phase that is best for supporting gale and storm development. When the active phase moves into the West Pacific, it being a low-pressure system, it takes warm, moist, energetic air down at the ocean surface on the equator, starts lifting it to the north. That eventually gets caught by the jet stream and energizes the jet stream. And a strong jet stream, therefore, is better at forming troughs, which create gales, which create surf. What the active phase also does is it dampens trade winds over the part of the Pacific where it is. It travels west to east on the equator. So as it's tracking across the Pacific, it's dampening trade winds. And what that does is it allows warm water that's typically pulled up, driven by high pressure and trade winds in the West Pacific, allows them to start flowing east, but not on the surface. They follow the thermocline down under the equator. They traverse the whole Pacific, and eventually it's known as a Kelvin wave. When that Kelvin wave hits Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands, it erupts to the surface and then creates a warm water slick at the surface. If you have successive active phases of the MJO, which we have had a lot of recently, that can create a very large warm ocean pool off of Ecuador, and that's what helps usher in El Nino, or at least is a signal of a pending El Nino, which is exactly where we are right now. So, the point being, we're looking for the active phase of the MJO because it drives, if you get a bunch of them, it really drives the weather pattern across the Pacific. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at winds. Remember, the active phase of the MJO dampens trade winds. So this is data from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator. The equator is right there. That's the East Pacific here. That's the West Pacific there. That's New Guinea there. Dateline right there. So we're just looking at the arrows. There's wind sensors on these buoys. There's buoys strung across here used for monitoring El Nino, but with the wind sensors, we can also monitor indirectly the MJO. The stronger the arrow, the longer the arrow, the stronger the wind. So strong east winds in the East Pacific, strong east winds in the Central Pacific, trades. But in the West Pacific, trades look pretty weak indeed. But it's not the actual wind speeds that matter. It's the anomaly, the difference from normal for this time of year. And you see, looking at this chart, well, yeah, winds are a little bit stronger than normal. They're lightly pushing out of the east. Same thing in the Central Pacific. But in the West Pacific, look at this, westerly anomalies. Maybe that suggests the active phase of the MJO, or perhaps if we're not in the active phase, maybe it suggests an El Nino base state taking hold, which we suspect is the case. Next up, we look at the forecast for the next 2 weeks. This is from the GFS model. Now, what are we looking at? Well, the blues are easterly anomalies. Consider that the inactive phase of the MJO. The oranges and reds, westerly anomalies, the active phase of the MJO. All right, but this is the whole planet on one chart. So the date line runs right up the middle. We know where the date line is. Far West Pacific starts right about 125 east. So right here, okay, that would be about where the maritime continent ends. Okay, and we're interested to about 170 west. This is the area where if you have westerly anomalies over this area, they can create those Kelvin waves we were talking about earlier. So here we are today, June 18th. We see westerly anomalies on the equator going the whole way to the date line. Sort of looks like the active phase of the MJO, but we also see a big pile of easterly anomalies that have been going for pretty much the most part of June, and then we see them forecast to redevelop. Now, the GFS model, last week, it suggests a big westerly wind burst with strong westerly anomalies right in the center of the Kelvin wave generation area. That has disappeared. Instead, we're left with this sort of insipid, well, some westerly anomalies, some easterly anomalies, kind of a mixed pattern. This is some of what we were hinting at in the beginning of the video about, well, what's going on with El Nino? Is it stalling? The models, the GFS model for right now is suggesting the westerly wind pattern, at least in the immediate future, not nearly as strong as what it thought it would be a week ago. The next question is the spring unpredictability barrier. That typically, the models have a real hard time when you're in the April, May, early part of June time frame. I think last week we said, okay, we're out of the unpredictability barrier, everything's great. Well, now we are more out of it, and things are not looking as positive. They're not negative. It's not like La Nina looks to be coming back, but El Nino looks to at least be taking a breather for the next week or two. Let's keep digging. Still looking for signs of the active phase of the MJO. Another variable that we can examine is outgoing long-wave radiation, OLR. Just fancy word for clouds. If you have a bunch of clouds, the sun can't reflect off the ocean surface back, and so if you have clouds, that's typically a sign of the active phase of the MJO. This chart, let's get oriented here. South America, Central America, Australia, New Guinea there. The equator right there, date line right there. Kelvin wave generation area, that spot we were talking about, right on the equator right there. The blues are cloudier than normal skies, so one would say the active phase of the MJO, but there isn't enough clouds there to really be that. And if you were in a La Nina or a inactive phase of the MJO, that is high pressure. That would be cloud-free skies. You'd see these reds and oranges, but there's none of that. So we're like in a dead neutral state. And this is a statistic model. And for 5 days from now, 10 days from now, 15 days from now, basically the next 2 weeks, it says a dead neutral MJO pattern. The GEFS model, that same model we were just looking at in the previous slide, pretty much saying the same thing. If anything, a weak, not even really an inactive phase, just a tendency towards inactive phase, maybe a week out from now, going for a week beyond that. So no clear MJO signal. Phase diagrams for those two models. What is this? How do you read this? Well, the MJO moves from west to east, and you see the Indian Ocean. It moves from the Indian Ocean to the maritime continent, over the West Pacific to the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. You can see this is what, in May, here is one active phase of the MJO tracking its way around the planet, and then we got into June, and the current active phase is, well, if the heavy dot is where it is right now. If it's outside of this circle, the further outside of this circle it is, the stronger it is. So an incredibly weak active phase. Per the statistic model, it's supposed to maybe make it to the West Pacific, but so weak that it doesn't even matter. The dynamic model just shows the active phase, making it to the West Pacific in 3 days, totally collapsing and retrograding and back in the Indian Ocean, and super weak. So either model depicting no real active phase of the MJO at all. The upper level model, this is a statistic model. Now, it paints a totally different picture. Again, so there's 8 panels here, 5 days each panel. South America, Central America, New Guinea there, the equator right there, the date line roughly there. This shows areas favorable for precipitation. The greens, wet air. Okay, and you can and that would be synonymous with the active phase of the MJO. The oranges and reds, the inactive phase, dry air. Okay, so this shows the active phase pretty solid over the West Pacific, tracking to the Central Pacific about the 3rd of July, then into the East Pacific and fading out as we get to mid-July, with the inactive phase of the MJO setting up maybe pretty much the whole month of July. So theoretically, according to this, right now we should be in a sweet spot for swell production, which we're not really. And if anything, it's only going to get worse as we get deeper into July. So a pretty slack pattern for right now. So let's go out a little further. This is a CFS model going out a month here, okay? Down here is the forecast. The date line runs right up the middle. West Pacific starts at about 125 east. So this is the forecast down here. This is past performance. So Kelvin wave generation area basically in this box right here. Now, this shows the active and inactive phases of the MJO. The black solid contour, active phase of the MJO back in March and early April, with associated the reds, strong westerly anomalies, and you can see the actual tropical storm development associated with that. Then in late April, dotted contour here, inactive phase of the MJO. Then here comes another active phase in May, pretty much running the whole way through May and early June. Strong westerly anomalies. Kelvin wave was produced by this, also by this one, okay? Currently inactive phase of the MJO, but notice there's this, here's where we are. Supposedly the inactive phase is fading out, but it's supposed to sort of briefly resurge on the date line, the early part of July, then be out of the picture. But notice what's going on here. So westerly anomalies forecast pretty much holding nonstop for the whole next month and building from July 1st, but there's the date line. Kelvin wave generation from area from there to there in this box. So we have westerly anomalies forecast pretty solid in the Kelvin wave generation area, even in the absence of the active phase of the MJO. But we do have this area of easterly anomalies forecast setting up on the date line. And this was not part of the plan at all. By now, according to the CFS model, we should have been in westerly anomalies filling the entire Kelvin wave generation area, starting about somewhere back in May and continuing. Now all of a sudden we're getting this kind of hint of, well, maybe the westerly anomalies aren't going to be as strong as early as we had planned. And then we have the CFS model going out 3 months. The forecast is here. What's happened is down here. All right. The yellows and oranges are westerly anomalies. You can see back in February, pretty much a active phase of the MJO sweeping. Oh, and I'm sorry. Date line right there. Far West Pacific starts right about there. This is the whole plan on one chart again. So Kelvin wave generation there, but it goes the whole way up through the model. So you can see this alternate west anomalies, east anomalies, west anomalies, east anomalies, west anomalies in May. All these produced Kelvin waves. And now we're in this very, very weak easterly anomaly pattern. And according to the model, from here on out, it's westerly anomalies and a pretty strong westerly anomaly burst here in the early part of July. But last week, the week before that, the week before that, the model was showing very strong westerly anomalies as we got into August and September. And all of a sudden, it's gone. Okay? And it's not just this one run of the model. In fact, on the Sundays when we've been doing the video, it just happens that every Sunday it keeps reappearing strong here. But a lot of times during the week for the past 2 or 3 weeks, it would default into this sort of a scenario. And then what's also interesting and not particularly a good way is easterly anomalies. This is out of the Kelvin wave generation area, but you see it south of Hawaii holding steady. All that was gone. There wasn't supposed to be nary a sign of any easterly anomalies in the Pacific. This suggests, at least for the moment, that the model is maybe suggesting that this El Nino is not going to build as strong as it was originally hyping up. Let's overlay the MJO here. Okay, so there's the last active phase of the MJO. We're in a current inactive phase. The good news is there are westerly anomalies still present. And then here comes our next active phase. But what was supposed to happen is this active phase was supposed to last for months and be huge and just be raging. Now we're in this kind of a weak active phase period. Now that is not necessarily a bad thing, because what I'm going to overlay here is the low pass filter. Okay, this is the high pressure, low pressure bias, the dotted contour, high pressure bias, the La Nina signal. Now, nothing has changed here. The La Nina signal last in February was strong over the date line. You see it moving. It's basically over California right now and supposed to be getting steadily weaker as we get into September, while the low pressure bias, the El Nino signal, which was over the maritime continent, now fully filling the Pacific from about Hawaii on west, and that's supposed to hold, if anything, get stronger with a third contour line right here into about the end of August, something like that. Now, the reason I say I'm not so worried about the MJO getting weak is typically what happens is as the low pressure bias gets stronger, okay, and I'm just going to pull the MJO out of this completely. As it gets stronger, it basically turns into a continuous active phase of the MJO. And we're seeing that right here with continuous westerly anomalies, but we're not seeing the pulses of westerly anomalies like we were seeing 1, 2, 3. It just sort of goes into this steady state thing. The question is that really the case? I mean, we're looking a couple of months out. My guess is if we're really going into El Nino and all this gets coupled, this MJO pattern, these will become stronger as we get into fall in October and November, and you will get the westerly wind bursts. And this might be sort of the model just not sure what's going on because we're out of the spring unpredictability barrier and it's trying to get its bearings. Or maybe it is. I mean, the real issue is we don't know. The models are great. This model has done a good job. But when you're looking 2 and 3 months out, well, I get excited by it, but the reality is you shouldn't be betting on any particular outcome. So for right now, we are going to take a more cautious approach to some of what's going on and some of the hype around El Nino development, due mainly to this model's tempering of its output. All right, so enough MJO discussion. What's going on regarding Kelvin waves and the movement of warm water from west to east? That's the hallmark, really, of El Nino, is transport of warm water from the West Pacific to the East Pacific, and it gets transported in the form of Kelvin waves. So we're looking at data from the TAO buoy array again. This is the West Pacific here. This is the East Pacific here. These little these X lines right here, these are the anchor lines on those buoys. The X's are actual sensors on the anchor lines. They pick up differences in water temperature. Use a model to fill in the gaps here, and you can literally see Kelvin waves pushing across the Pacific. Now, it takes 3 to almost 4 months to go from the far west Pacific, for a Kelvin wave to go from the far west Pacific to the East Pacific. So this is average temperatures. And during La Nina, you would see a lot of cold water here. We're not seeing any of that. These temperatures are in centigrade. So 30 degrees centigrade. In fact, that's very warm water. It wasn't even on the chart 3-4 weeks ago. And then last week, I think it was about at 170. Today, it's about 173. So warmer water moving off to the east. 29 degree isotherm at 160 west. I think that's holding about where it was. The 28 degree isotherm, the whole way to 120. It's been toggling between 110 and 120 for a couple of weeks now. And the 24 degree isotherm, the whole way into Ecuador. So warm water, definitely moving off. But you get a better picture by looking at the anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of year. And we see piles of warm water in the East Pacific, 3, 4, 5, 6 degree anomalies. 6 degrees, that's like 11 degrees Fahrenheit. This is centigrade. Okay, what we don't see, and what we did see last week, was a ball of warm water here, another Kelvin wave. I think it's still here. I think this is the tail end of it here, and that it's being assimilated in with all this other warm water already present from, I think it's 4. This is the 5th Kelvin wave here. I think there's a 6th trying to organize behind it from the most recent active phase of the MJO. But there is a little bit of a break here. Okay. That said, for a Kelvin wave to get from here to here takes about 3 months. So there's 2.5 months at least of warm water in the pipe. So if we're in, let's say, mid-June to July to August, to the early part of September, we're covered with warm water. Typically, El Nino, and that just gets it to here, and then it still has to make it up to the surface and got to get caught by the trade winds. So this all still supports an El Nino, but the way the CFS model was hyping it is there would be multiple more Kelvin waves coming, and right now it appears there's a gap, at least according to this, in that process. Fortunately, there is another technology using satellite images to measure the height of the ocean's surface and to infer what's going on deeper down in the ocean. It's painting now this runs a little bit behind. This is the 12th of June, but there's our big ball of warm water there in the West Pacific. Here is that Kelvin wave number 5 we saw last week. It's still there, but you see it is starting to merge with the big ball. So hard to tell, but the suspicion is there is, again, 3 months of warm water in the pipe. Now, the question is there another Kelvin wave developing way back here from those westerly anomalies that occurred just a couple of weeks ago on the over in the Kelvin wave generation area? In fact, let's look. Yes, this Kelvin wave here that went pretty much the whole way through May into the early part of June. For sure, this, we believe, has generated a Kelvin wave. And we think it's starting to show right here, but we got to give it a couple of weeks. I mean, these things move very slow. To get from here to here, probably at least 4 months. So we'll see. But we think another Kelvin wave is in flight. And if it's just starting now, well, four plus months from now is, well, June to July, August, September, October, mid-October. Then that pretty much is all you need to get yourself into a good El Nino situation. Sea level anomalies. So this is the satellite data. These are not temperatures. This is the height of the ocean surface. Use a satellite polar orbit around the planet from the north over the south pole. The Earth spins underneath it while the satellite just does its loop. After about a week, you get a pass over every square inch of the planet's oceans. You strip out the waves, the wind waves, the tide. Is the sphere of the ocean higher or lower than normal? Why does that matter? Well, warm water at depth expands. If it expands, it'll create a bulge on the ocean surface. Cold water at depth contracts. It'll create a divot on the ocean surface. So let's get ourselves oriented here. There's Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Central America, the equator there, dateline there, New Guinea right there. We see positive anomalies. And see, here's the maritime continent. This is at 120 east. So warm water would, if you get the active phase of the MJO, low pressure counterclockwise circulation, creating west anomalies across here. Warm water in the shallow waters of the maritime continent gets squeezed out, fall down off of New Guinea, create a pool of warm water there, which we see. And that 5 centimeters anomalies the whole way across the Pacific, peaking at about 10 centimeters. There's the Galapagos right there off Ecuador. So according to this, no halt of the warm water transport machine and months of warm water still in the pipe, according to this. In fact, let's put this in perspective. Upper ocean heat anomalies. This is the West Pacific here, East Pacific here, basically 80 west, that's Ecuador. And the maritime continent starts just off the edge of the chart here. But you see, this was last year in July. La Nina in control, cold water, the blue's colder than normal temperatures. Then we got a little Kelvin wave back in December. Just a little bit of warm water sort of seeped across. We got the upwelling phase of the Kelvin wave cycle, and then another Kelvin wave in January, and another one behind that, another one behind that. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 more warm water, another Kelvin wave pushing across. And we think number 6 is trying to develop, but also notice the availability of warm water in the West Pacific, not nearly as copious as it was. Perhaps the warm pool is getting a bit tapped out, and all the warm water that was here is now over here. We think this is going to build some more. We think there is Again, one more Kelvin wave in flight and another one probably being generated. After that, though, suspect things are going to pretty much start just going into a static mode. Sea surface temperatures. All right. So clearly you can see the El Nino signal. Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Central America, Hawaii up there, the equator right there. Lots of warm water gurgling off of Peru and Ecuador, being caught by the trades, dragged off to the west to about 160 west. But, and we'll look at this in a minute, the warm water out here isn't quite as strong as it was last week. In fact, even in spots around here, it's not growing, it's holding steady, which is good. I mean, that's, at some point, the atmosphere and the ocean need to get coupled together, and the atmosphere is getting coupled, but it's not vigorously supporting the El Nino pattern like you'd want to. But, I mean, this is pretty typical for this phase in the life cycle of El Nino. You don't get that good coupling and the real westerly wind burst machine going till September, October, November sort of thing. So it would not be surprising to have a bit of a stall right now, be it the change out of the spring unpredictability barrier, be it any of a million different things that it could be. But for right now, the warm water has not built any from last week. If anything, it's given up a little. Sea surface temperature trend for the past week. All right, you see just some mild cooling pockets here on the equator, but otherwise a neutral state. Neither warming, nor really getting cold. I mean, this is all pretty much noise level stuff. So a steady state pattern. And then the backed off view, I mean, clearly this is an El Nino signal. We're not saying that El Nino has suddenly disappeared or that it's going to suddenly disappear. It's more like it's just stalled for the moment. And the CFS model, maybe not sure where it's going. And so here's where we are at the moment. Let's do some comparisons. Actually, before that, let's just look at sea surface temperatures, the index. We got a graph here. Nino 1.2 region. This is the area right there by Peru and Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands. Temperatures 2.547 degrees above normal. That's quite warm indeed, and basically holding there since April 1st. Okay, so the warm, and this is the source where all the upwelling occurs, and it's dead stable. And we don't think anything is going to change here for months given the volume of warm water subsurface reaching into Ecuador. Now down in the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring region, this is on the equator from south of California out to about the date line, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. Temperatures 0.675, so they've actually come down. They were up at almost 0.985, I think, degrees, down a little bit lately. Okay, we think the temperature trend is still going to go up, but there's just a stall going on for right now. Ocean currents, the equatorial current. Now, last time we showed this chart, it was sort of a mixed bag. If anything, it's looking far better now. So where are we? New Guinea there, the equator right there. There's the maritime continent. You see all the warm water in there, slowly getting drawn out, just in a river flowing off from west to east. I'm not sure if you can actually see the moving arrows on this image, but flowing the whole way across the equator, pretty much steady and solid. Now let's get ourselves up to Ecuador, the final part, from west to east, and then a bit of a stall. We saw that just a little bit of cooling around the Galapagos, and this is likely due to the inactive phase of the MJO that's pushing across the Pacific and the easterly anomalies that are occurring right now. We think that's what's happening here. Not of big concern, just of note. So here's the high-res zoomed-in sea surface temperature anomaly chart for right now. Again, Peru, Chile down there, Ecuador right there, the Galapagos. You see all the warming there, dragging out off to the east. Let's see if we can go back last week. Okay, so we're just going to toggle back and forth between these. See, there's a little bit more concentration of warming right there. The other thing is last week there was a little bit more warming out here. Let's go back to the week before, or this week and the week before. And you could also see the warming extended almost to the date line, and now it's backed off a little bit. This is all probably likely due to trade wind situations and more local things than actual any direct connection to the robustness of El Nino at the moment. Now let's do some comparisons. So this was the 97 El Nino, the gold standard, strongest El Nino, the, sort of the model for what a super El Nino looks like. And June 17th of 97, there's the warmth right up along the coast and a pretty strong signal going out to even 170 west compared to this week's. Not as strong there, not going out as far, suggesting that, we'll just go back, here's 97, suggesting that this year's El Nino is now not tracking to the strength of the 97 El Nino. This pause that we're in is going to probably put this El Nino not in the category of the 97, because if I recall, the 97 El Nino just kept building and building and building. There was no pause. There is some signs of weakness now in this year's El Nino. Is that a bad thing? Maybe not, because 97 was off the top in terms of weather in California and conditions and destruction to local property. And so a super El Nino, though it's real exciting and all that, maybe isn't necessarily a good thing for surf or even snow. It's just destruction and mayhem. And I don't know after last winter that we need any more of that. So let's compare this year's El Nino to another solid El Nino of recent memory, the one in 2015. And here we go. And you look at this and go, well, where we are actually looks stronger than where we were in the 2015 El Nino there's not a whole lot going on out there, whereas, well, this one isn't as strong, but this year's is more warming back here. So sort of seems like maybe we are on par. If these aren't absolutely really close to each other, we're pretty much on par with the 2015 El Nino. And that one was solid indeed, with great surf all during the winter and good snow and all that kind of stuff. And yes, there was some mayhem, but it wasn't over the top like 97. So we'll see how this all plays out, but just a little comparative analysis. So that gets us to, well, is the atmosphere sensing what's going on in the ocean? Are the ocean and the atmosphere getting coupled? We can determine that by looking at the Southern Oscillation Index, the difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, right here, and Tahiti. When pressure, and Tahiti's in the Pacific, Darwin's sort of in the Indian Ocean. When pressure is lower in Tahiti, the index goes negative. Today's value, minus 26.43. That's good news. That's suggesting at least the active phase of the MJO. And you go back and you look, well, okay, so we did have about 5 days here where we were positive. But prior to that, whoa, minus 60, minus 45. It's kind of a noisy value, the daily numbers, but they've been pretty much steadily negative for a month. The 30-day average takes some of the noise out of it. Minus 13.25. Okay, we were up to minus 19 at one point. When you're at the peak of El Nino, this thing starts heading up to 20 to 25. We're clearly in the ballpark. The 90-day average, now this is also a good active-inactive phase of the MJO sort of indicator. Right now, it's showing what appears to be a steady active phase of the MJO, though we know that is not happening. The 90-day average, minus 6.81. Where were we? We got up to minus 7.57 earlier in June. But prior to that, we've been steadily going negative. So all signs here, now this is a lagging indicator, indicate El Nino is healthy and continuing to evolve. Maybe just not as strong as we had been hoping for. Here is the 30-day moving SOI graphed out just to put things in perspective. 0 is right there. When you're positive, this is La Nina, especially when you're up at 20. Back in 2021, we were at 20. We sort of took a dip, and then it was a steady uphill climb, just pure La Nina, the whole way into January of this year. And then, boom, the bottom just fell out. Now, the downward spikes are the active phase of the MJO. The upward spikes are the inactive phase. Clearly, we're in a little bit of an inactive phase. That might explain that little bit of a current anomaly thing we saw off of Ecuador. That would explain the stalling of the building of the warming. That would explain the no clear sign of a immediately building another Kelvin wave sort of thing. But all that is pretty normal. The real message from all this is, though, we are clearly in negative territory. It seems like we're continuing to move there, suggesting El Nino is going nowhere. So what's the forecast? This is raw data from the CFS version 2 model for sea surface temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring region. This is the raw data, so it's a little bit overhyped. It suggests water temperatures getting to about 1.85 degrees above normal in October. In fact, where are we? We're right here at about 0.8 degrees. Temperatures sort of stalling a little bit and then continuing their upward climb as we get maybe a week or two out. So that's all good news. Super El Nino would put us up in the above 2 degree anomaly. We're not seeing that. Now, this is the raw data. The PDF corrected, sort of the more moderate version of it, suggests temperatures getting to only 1.4 degrees. That still seems a little bit on the low side to me, but it does show this stalling of the warming. So here's mid-July. This would be July 15th for maybe the next 3 weeks or so, holding at about 0.9 of a degree, and then a slow upward climb from there as we get deeper into the summer. So, not sure which version of these is right or if neither of them are right. That said, starting in a day, I think it is tomorrow, the IRI consensus model, the every El Nino model there is, the latest update will be published. We can see how the CFS version 2 model compares to all the other models. So the CFS has typically been sort of on the high side. We'll see if that's still the case. And we'll sort of get a sense of, well, what is the magic number that we're shooting for? Is it going to be sea surface temperature anomalies of 1.4 degrees above normal at the peak of El Nino? Or is it going to be 2 degrees or higher? At this point, it seems like super El Nino status, at least for the moment, is not likely, and that maybe we're just going to be in typical run-of-the-mill El Nino territory, or maybe strong El Nino, but not super El Nino. We'll just have to wait and see. That said, Southern Hemiswell, small Southern Hemiswell, starting show in California. Another gale is organizing in the upper reaches of the central South Pacific, and Hawaii will get in the mix for this one with some Southern Hemiswell, and California as well. And then possibly a little bit more beyond that. Models having a little bit of a hard time figuring it all out more than 3 or 4 days out, but that's not typical. And then, of course, the long-term thing. When will El Nino really get a foothold in the Pacific Ocean? And when will it start driving the jet stream and maybe start ramping up the Southern Hemiswell machine? Right now, we are just like we were last winter. The worst winter ever. This is the worst summer. That said, there are still waves. There's stuff, waves to go ride, but it just hasn't been a prolific summer in terms of consistent big waves. It's been sporadic, small waves, which pretty much is typical for a La Nina pattern. We're waiting for the El Nino pattern to get a foothold in the Pacific. We think that's going to happen come late July or so. So fingers crossed that happens, and just bide your time to then. Do what you got to do, take care of business, because at some point we suspect this pattern will change. This period of dampened swell production that we've been in since, all winter and all summer, that will change. It's just a question of when. We don't have the answer. All we have is a guess. All right, so that's our video for this week. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. That helps the algorithms. If you want to donate a little bit, please do. We appreciate it. And other than that, we are going to do this next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you then. Stay safe, get some waves.